Hi, I'm Charles, and you're watching The State of the Republic. We begin this week with the news of ongoing wildfires in California. The fires have burned 200,000 acres of land, and has already become one of the most deadly blazes in modern memory, with the death toll now standing at over 30. At this point, it will be wise to remember the effects of climate change in worsening these kind of disasters. On the other side of America, Puerto Rico is still attempting to clean up after being battered by Hurricane Maria. Much of the island is still without power, food shortages are continuing, and over one-third of the island does not have access to clean drinking water. In fact, things have become so desperate that in one particular area, Puerto Ricans are actually resorting to drinking from a hazardous waste site. The official death toll from the storm now stands at over 40, but that number is widely considered to be underreported, with more realistic estimates ranging into the hundreds. Trump has not only failed to address the crisis, but has actually threatened to withdraw federal resources from the island. In a perfect metaphor for the Trump administration's bungling of everything related to Puerto Rico, Energy Secretary Rick Oops Perry appeared to forget that Puerto Rico was an American territory filled with Americans during a congressional hearing.
Could you go specifically into what conversations you've had already with PREPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, the bondholders? What is your plan to build a more distributed grid there with the modern technology that's at our fingertips?
Congresswoman Castor, you have just pointed out the real challenge that this country faces in dealing with the territory and the citizens of Puerto Rico. That's a country that already had its challenges before this.
The Trump administration is doing its damnedest to ignore the Puerto Rican people, who once again are Americans, Rick Perry. The Pentagon even had a set of talking points to spin the anemic response into a positive, which they kept for some reason accidentally emailing to a Bloomberg reporter. Congress did end up passing a disaster relief bill, but it only served to add insult to injury by possibly foisting another $5 billion worth of debt on the island, while giving $16 billion to the Wall Street vultures who already hold Puerto Rican debt. On foreign policy, the administration continued to destroy what was left of America's international reputation. Trump this week decertified Iran's compliance with the nuclear agreement, punting the decision to the Republican Senate. Such decertification comes despite compliance certification by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United States State Department, Secretary of Defense Mattis, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford. This move was quickly condemned by EU nations, including the German Foreign Minister. This decision comes after the U.S. withdrawal this week from UNESCO, the UN cultural organization, for a supposed anti-Israel bias. Actions like these are quickly alienating America's friends and allies, and conferring near-international pariah status on the United States. Meanwhile, on the home front, the Trump administration continues our march back to the Gilded Age. Trump nominated a person who wants to privatize the National Weather Service to head up the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which, in addition to providing crucial climate and weather-related data, also happens to oversee the National Weather Service. So, in the future, if you want to know whether there's a storm going on in your area, you'll have to end up paying money to a private company, because freedom. EPA Administrator and evil oil man baby Scott Pruitt moved to withdraw the United States from the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, which would not only hasten climate change, but also cause thousands of premature pollution-related deaths. The White House also chose to take a massive swing at the ACA this week. Trump signed an executive order allowing for the return of the kind of junk plans that don't cover anything that had previously been outlawed by the ACA, and is also suspending subsidy payments for the insurance exchanges for the poor. The subsidy cuts are projected by the CBO to increase the deficit by $194 billion, increase premiums by 20%, and cause 1 million people to lose their coverage. To make matters worse, the Trump administration is also sinking the efforts of Senators Patty Murray and Lamar Alexander's efforts at a bipartisan patch for the ACA. These changes are part of a massive effort by this administration to undermine and destroy the ACA without repealing it outright, and is a classic example of Republicans breaking government and then complaining that government is broken. Several other major news pieces came from Capitol Hill this week. Republicans are increasingly worried about the complete failure of their legislative agenda, with even their so-called tax reform bill now under pressure. The Republicans' extremely thin Senate majority meant that the leadership was already extremely worried about not having enough votes, a worry only increased by the medically related absence of Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran. In congressional ethics news, Representative Chris Collins, a New York Republican who is one of Trump's closest allies, is now under investigation for insider trading. Meanwhile, the corruption case against New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez has begun unraveling, with prosecutors unable to prove a quid pro quo standard that was imposed by the reactionary Supreme Court in the 2016 McDonnell case. On the electoral front, Senator Susan Collins of Maine, a relatively moderate Republican senator, announced this week that she will not be running for governor of her state in 2018 and will instead remain in the Senate. The move is a blow to Democratic hopes of retaking the Senate, as her seat would most likely go to a Democrat or an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. Meanwhile, in Alabama, the special Senate election fight rages on, as Christian Taliban leader Roy Moore keeps on being enveloped in more and more scandal. Moore failed to disclose a $180,000 salary from a charity he ran, and the salary given totaled over $1 million, despite previous denials of receiving any salary from the charity. Furthermore, Roy Moore's son has now been arrested for the 9th time, this time for a misdemeanor charge related to possible illegal hunting. Moore's son had previously been arrested for DUI and drug-related charges, a shining example of a well-raised evangelical Christian. It bears remembering at this time that Moore fought an attempt to remove segregationist language from the Alabama state constitution, has endorsed nullification of federal court decisions, and has stated that national tragedies like 9/11 and Sandy Hook are the fault of Americans not being godly enough. Steve Bannon, meanwhile, is strategizing on primarying all Senate Republican incumbents in 2018, except for Ted Twitterfucker Cruz. And some of his candidates are truly terrifying. But the one who is head and shoulders above the rest in terms of being a terrible person is Eric Prince. Prince is the brother of Betsy Potential Grizzlies DeVos, and the founder of what is now known as Academi, a major mercenary outfit. Academi was established under the name Blackwater, and their contractors were infamous for war crimes in Iraq, in particular the Nisour Square massacre, where 17 Iraqi civilians were gunned down by Blackwater mercenaries. Prince was also responsible for attempting to set up an unofficial back channel between the Trump administration and the Russian government. In other words, Bannon is attempting to elect a war criminal and possible traitorous mercenary to the United States Senate. Meanwhile, there is even more news about incompetence and scandal from the White House. Trump chose to go golfing this week instead of receiving the bodies of U.S. soldiers killed in Niger at Dover Air Force Base. And Mike Pence spent over $250,000 on a taxpayer-funded charade to attack NFL players for kneeling in protest against racial inequality. On the other hand, NBC finally got the background for the meeting after which Tillerson called Trump a moron. Apparently, at a Pentagon meeting, Trump demanded a nearly tenfold increase in the amount of nuclear weapons in America's arsenal, from the current number of approximately 4,000 weapons today. For the record, security experts believe that our current arsenal is already too large, and that a few hundred weapons would be more than enough to deter possible attacks from foreign nations. Trump lashed out at NBC after the story broke, crying fake news, suggesting governmental retaliation against NBC, and condemning the First Amendment's press freedoms. In response, Republican Senator Ben Sasse essentially accused Trump of violating the Constitution, questioning whether he was breaking his oath to defend the First Amendment. Other Republican senators have also been taking stronger public stances against Trump. Senator John McCain released a bipartisan joint statement with Senator Ben Cardin, calling out the Trump administration for failing to properly implement the congressional Russia sanctions. But by far, the most damaging shots taken by a Republican senator this week came from Republican Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Corker was attacked by Trump on Twitter last Saturday, and Corker responded by lamenting that the White House has become an adult daycare center. It rapidly became clear why Trump took a swing at Corker the next day, when the New York Times released a truly scathing interview with Corker about the situation in the White House. Corker stated that he knew that every day at the White House was a situation of trying to contain Trump, and that Trump was leading America towards World War III. Trump responded to the news of the story by once again tweeting out a bunch of lies, attacking both Corker and the New York Times. Corker has since once again attacked Trump for his undermining of Secretary of State Tillerson. Corker's comments have broken the dam for even more stories to emerge about the instability and incompetence of Trump. Vanity Fair broke a story about even White House officials losing confidence in him, and that he is unraveling and his mental state is deteriorating, and becoming increasingly worried about possible invocation of the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. The Russia scandal also continues to swirl around the administration, with this week seeing even more revelations about the extent of Russian social media-based election interference. The major tech companies like Google, Twitter, and Facebook have continued to be relatively uncooperative, and what cooperation has occurred seems primarily in the interest of staving off congressional anger and possible prosecution. Congressional hearings are already planned for representatives from the tech companies. Investigators are also expanding their efforts in investigating the Trump campaign staff itself, with congressional subpoenas expected to be issued against multiple Trump campaign aides. Manafort, the previous Trump campaign manager, has also been revealed to be even more financially beholden to Russian oligarchs than previously thought, with debts estimated at $26 million as part of $60 million in overall transactions. In even better news for America, Special Counsel Mueller's team interviewed former White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus on Friday. Trump's presidency is rapidly deteriorating under the pressures of the job, and his incompetence and scandals are increasingly likely to strangle what's left of Trump's presidency. Well, that does it for this week's news. Thank you for watching the program. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting content.